All right, so let's start with the big story that we're tracking on WION at this hour, where the United States has now imposed new sanctions on 7 top Russian officials. And this is over the attempted assassination of the Kremlin critic and also the opposition leader, Alexei Navalny.
Today, the United States is announcing sanctions on 7 senior members of the Russian government, an expansion of sanctions under the Chemical and Biological Weapons Control and Warfare Elimination Act, new export restrictions on items that could be used for biological agent and chemical production, and visa restrictions.
Now, this is President Joe Biden's most direct challenge so far to Moscow, and under the said sanctions, the assets of the officials in the United States have been frozen. The key people who've been named in the U.S. sanctions, in fact, include Alexander Bortnikov, the head of the FSB, Russia's premier intelligence agency, and also about 14 entities that are involved in the chemical and the biological industrial base in Russia. Washington has also blacklisted the deputy defense ministers Alexei Navalny and Pavel Popov. Now, reacting to the sanctions that have been imposed by the United States, Kremlin officials have hit back and have said that the sanctions will not achieve their stated goal and will only work to worsen the already strained relations between the two nations.
Тем, кто продолжает такую, можно сказать, зависимость, просто такую, знаете, зависимость от каких-то рестрикций и введения межгосударственных дел. Наверное, им пора задуматься, а достигают ли они какой-то цели.
Now, the measures are being coordinated with similar moves taken by the European Union. Earlier on Tuesday, Brussels announced a travel ban and also an asset freeze on several senior officials. They include Alexander Kalashnikov, the head of the Russian prison system, Alexander Bastrykin, the chairman of the investigative committee, Chief Prosecutor Igor Krasnov, and Viktor Zolotov, the head of Russia's National Guard. Now, according to senior officials, the United States intelligence agencies have concluded that Moscow was in fact behind the near-fatal nerve agent attack on Alexei Navalny last year.
The people of this nation are up to it.
We are exercising our authorities to send a clear signal that Russia's use of chemical weapons and human rights abuses have severe consequences. Any use of chemical weapons anywhere, at any time, by anyone, under any circumstance, is unacceptable and it contravenes international norms. We also welcome the action taken by the EU earlier today to impose costs on Russia under its own new global human rights authorities.
The sanctions imposed by the United States and the EU follow moves by the United Kingdom to impose sanctions against Russia. But one thing that remains very unclear is whether the 7 officials named by the United States had any assets in the United States. Therefore, it makes it pretty hard to judge if the sanctions were just pretty symbolic in nature. Alexei Navalny, remember, was arrested on the 17th of January earlier this year, right after his return from Germany. As soon as he landed at the Moscow airport, he spent nearly about 5 months in Germany recovering from the nerve agent poisoning attack that the critic has blamed Kremlin for. Russia, for its part, has rejected the accusation on numerous occasions and has also accused Alexei Navalny of having colluded with Western intelligence agencies. Now, to give us more insights in terms of what these sanctions by the Americans, of course, mean, we are joined in by our correspondent Stuart Smith, who's joining us live from Moscow. Thank you very much, Stuart, for joining us in this broadcast and beyond. Now, it's very interesting that the Americans have chosen to sanction some of these top Russian officials, but these sanctions apply only for their assets that they have in the United States. Are these sanctions merely symbolic?
Some are claiming that is the case, that indeed these sanctions are deliberately targeting top officials. They're avoiding targeting the Russian economy more generally in the hope that this is a more powerful symbol and has a greater effect. But indeed, we don't know whether these officials have assets in the US. Having said that, the sanctions do go slightly further than that. They also stop these officials doing business with anyone in the United States, which could prove slightly more challenging for these officials. The European Union's sanctions are slightly different in that, as well as banning these people from holding assets in the European Union and doing business with citizens in the European Union, they also prevent these people travelling to the European Union. Again, a question though, are these 4 officials banned by the European Union? Were they ever planning to travel to the EU anytime soon? So indeed it is limited in its scope. However, both the EU and the US have chosen to take similar strategies here, focusing just on officials and not on the Russian economy itself. A slightly different focus, though. The European Union going for officials involved in the imprisonment of Alexei Navalny, the opposition figure, so targeting people in the prison service and in the judiciary. The United States focusing more on the poisoning of Alexei Navalny and therefore focusing on members of the presidential administration and the security services. Together, clearly a coordinated decision. These cover a broad variety of Russia's top officials, and they are the highest members of much of these agencies, so they have gone almost as close to the very top of the Russian hierarchy as they can, steering clear, though, of targeting anything like President Putin himself.
Right, now, at this point of time, have the Russians, of course, responded to these sanctions?
Yes, very vocally. We've heard from the Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, who says that Russia will respond not necessarily in the same way, but will definitely unequivocally respond to these sanctions. And a spokesperson at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is calling this a hostile anti-Russia act, which is designed to cultivate an image of an enemy against the United States. She's calling it interfering in Russia's internal affairs and says that the US has no moral right to lecture outside countries about their human rights records and international treaty violations, accusing the United States of doing the exact same thing itself. It's clear that the Russian Foreign Ministry is seeing this as a major attack on Russian officials and will be responding in turn. They say the response will be equivalent, but not necessarily in the same way. And remember that this is not the only thing the United States has a problem with Russia right now. There are potentially more sanctions to come over the solar winds hack, which the United States blames Russia for. This may not be the end of sanctions from the United States, and they come on top of a huge number of sanctions already imposed over Ukraine, over intervention in Libya, over violations of trade policy, chemical weapons use in Syria. Russia is now under an extraordinary number of sanctions for a variety of different reasons.
Absolutely. And also this marks a clear departure from the policy that was pursued under Donald Trump, where many people within the United States, in fact, said that Donald Trump had a very soft approach towards his counterpart in Russia, Vladimir Putin. And we see Joe Biden is actually quite willing to rough Vladimir Putin up, you know, in many of these issues, because there are other issues like, for instance, where Russians have been accused of even meddling in the 2020 US presidential election. So there is going to be more friction between Russia and the United States. Is that what we are likely to expect?
Certainly, and Joe Biden, during his presidential election campaign, made he never hid this fact. He said he was going to be tougher on Russia, referred to Russia as an opponent during that campaign, and clearly he has taken a different approach. And not only the United States doing changing its tack towards Russia, but the United States encouraging other blocs, other institutions to also be tougher on Russia. This is coordination with the European Union, which we didn't see in the same way with President Donald Trump. And similarly, the United Nations human rights experts are now coming out and saying that they also now have concluded Russia was behind the poisoning of Alexei Navalny. It's not just sanctions coming from the US, but also going further to unite other institutions against what it's calling human rights violations and international treaty violations of Russia. Joe Biden also, indeed, as you say, looking into election interference. 2016 seems to be particularly been particularly affected by Russian interference, intelligence services coming to that conclusion, but also looking into whether that affected anything in the 2020 election as well.
All right, we'll have to leave there. Thank you very much indeed, Stuart Smith, for joining us and getting us all those updates from Moscow there. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.